everyone, and welcome to Dissonant Dialogues. I'm Emily, and I'm here with my co-host Claire. Claire, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty well. I actually just got back from my second ever massage, which I think musicians, if you've ever had one before, highly recommend. They are incredible for the amount of tension that we hold in our bodies. So I'm having a pretty nice day. Today, we have a guest joining us. Nathan Waller is a music educator who has taught elementary and middle level orchestra for over 10 years. His musical journey began in the fifth grade band on the trumpet. He began playing cello when he was in high school while studying conducting. Nathan received a music education degree at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. During his second year of teaching at a summer orchestra camp, his bowhand pedagogy idea was invented, the Tadpoles, which we will discuss today, while he was starting 75 fourth graders on string instruments. So let's welcome Nathan. Nathan, how are you doing today?
Great. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to bring on another guest for Dissonant Dialogues. We have quite a number of guests for season two. So yeah, I was really excited when you reached out to me, specifically having a string pedagogue here. Is very exciting because I think we talked to a lot of like band directors and choir directors, but it's hard to like narrow right down on the strings, and that's my forte. So it's very exciting. I kind of gave a little bit of a background on you, but I'm curious. I love to always ask people like, what was your moment of knowing that you wanted to pursue music as your career?
Hmm. I was kind of a late bloomer in a lot of aspects, and I started playing trumpet in fifth grade. I started playing cello in ninth grade, and it really wasn't until later high school that I just had this amazing, my band director and mentor. He kind of just sat me down. We had a big talk about like what does my career look like as a future, and I was considering a few things, and he really just laid it out logically, and music made the most sense. And he did a lot to encourage me that I could be a performer or an arranger or a composer or a conductor or an educator. He just like really instilled that belief. So I think without him, um, I would probably be a cabinet maker right now.
That's specific. That's what you would be doing.
Specifically, yes, because that's what my dad did.
I was going to
see.
ask, did you have family generational ties to music, or were you sort of the trendsetter there?
Yeah, I broke the mold. I was the youngest of five.
Wow.
None of the others were musicians. I had grandpas who played in polka bands.
We love that. My husband's Polish, and he's very passionate. He's learning concertina and accordion by himself right now. So
Oh, wow.
One of the main questions I had for you is I wanted you to take us through the process of nowadays, what it's like interviewing for teaching jobs.
Yeah. So I interviewed for a lot of jobs right out of college. I've since been on a lot of interview committees, and they really contain about 3 or 4 parts now. For a music education job, do the main interview, they'll have you play a solo, and then they'll have you either teach a short lesson to a student or another adult, or conduct the ensemble that you're uh, interviewing for. And so it's a very like comprehensive multi-step part. And I would say from the interviewer side, the two main things they're looking for is just competence in your subject matter, and then an overall confidence. Just a confidence in the way that you talk to the other adults, a confidence in the way you talk to the students, a confidence in the way that you answer the questions. And that just comes down to like simple coaching of limiting your ums, making sure you're making eye contact and having coherent sentences.
Those things seem like so simple, but while I'm student teaching right now and I'm recording myself and I'm listening back, or even just in the moment, really thinking about what I'm saying, I'm like, oh yeah, that sentence made like no sense to anyone except me. So it really does take quite a bit of practice. In high school, I was on the speech and debate team, and I kind of just like fell into it because I had a sibling that did it too. And that ended up being like a really big thing for me. I kind of found like a love and a passion for it. And it was very helpful as someone who was like very shy and an introvert to get that kind of like public speaking voice, because basically every day as a teacher, like we're constantly putting on a performance. I feel like I'm giving that speech every single day now, and I'm just used to it. Yeah, that process, I from what I've heard, it's really changed over time. And I think for the better, because it's really great to be able to like test candidates, not just by having an interview, but actually having them in front of the kids and getting to see how they do. But then it's also a bit of a pain for all the candidates. And so I'm curious generally, how long does that process occur over?
They all happen within the same hour.
Oh, really? It's just one after another.
Yep, usually.
Wow.
So it depends on the district. Some districts will have you do a first round interview where it's just the interview. And then they'll bring you in for a bigger interview with those other parts. Some other general advice I would give to people who are in that process right now. I think some of the worst advice that I've heard was someone told me an interview is that's your time to get to brag. You can't have an ego in an interview because they want to know like who you are and what you've done, so it's okay to brag. And I can't tell you how much of a turnoff that is for interview committees. You're looking for someone who's a right fit for your organization too. So you need to stay humble in the interviews. Let your resume do the talking. That's the point of the resume. And if you don't have a good resume, and that's what you need to work on right now, is either find experiences or create experiences that you can put on that resume that's concretely showing who you are. But in the interview itself, you want to be conversational and you got to be you. Like, and I know that sounds really generic to say, just be yourself, but specifically the way that I prepare for interviews, maybe it's a little psycho, but I would recommend this for anyone who doesn't know how they react in those situations. I actually type out my answer to all of the interview questions. And you might say, well, how do you know what the questions are? I don't. I'm just giving the best guess. Like there's probably like 12 questions that you could Google or guess and get pretty close. And then I'll basically write an editorial in just a Google document. And I'll write out completely, if this was a perfect scenario where I got to read my answers to the interview committee, this is what I would say, and I'll edit it. And then I'll just take some time reading through those to kind of like get a sense of how I want that to sound in my head. And then I start rehearsing it like you would in a speech competition, where while I'm driving in my car, I will turn everything else off and just talk to myself like I'm answering the question. Try to eliminate ums and ahs and try to not add other interjections, like really try to stick to my script. And what that does, at any point in the interview, if you lose your cool, or if they ask questions that aren't quite the ones you prepared for, you'll at least have those stock baseline answers that you can find your way to, I guess, especially if they're good, well thought out answers. Don't plan any jokes. I've seen that before in person where someone kind of has punchlines rehearsed and that comes off really robotic. Like if you're a funny person, just let yourself be open to the opportunity of you responding to a funny moment in the interview, but you don't need to try to be funny in the interview. The last thing I would say is, this is a big subject, but like AI, right? It's using an AI to write your cover letter, or that process I just described. There's someone listening right now who's like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll just put in a bunch of interview questions and ask AI how they would answer it. And that comes back to what I said about like being yourself, not being cliche, because the point of AI is to augment your own personality, not to hand you the perfect answer to that question. Because AI always will choose the most middle of the road, boring, perfect answer for things. And they're not going to remember who you are if you use that as your template. So really trying to stay true to yourself, how you'd answer those questions. Usually there's a question like, tell us about a time when a student was misbehaving in the classroom and you had to deal with it. And if you're a fresh out of college teacher and you didn't really come across that in your student teaching, or you did and your cooperating teacher handled it, it's totally fine to say, I never had that experience personally yet. But when I do have that experience, I would plan to follow the school's handbook and remind the student of our classroom expectations. You don't have to just make up something fake, as I think a lot of people are tempted to do, and then that's really obvious as well in an interview. Someone is fabricating a scenario, or some places still ask the question, what are, give us your top 1, 2, or 3 strengths, and then they follow that up with what are your top.
Those questions.
Yeah, I know. Me too. And then it's what are your top 3 weaknesses?
That's even worse.
That's such a horrible question, and it's always cringy when people are like, well, my weakness is that I just care too much.
I work too hard. I'm just such a workaholic. Yeah, I hate those.
Yeah. But the honest answer is like, well, I'm really bad at answering emails within 24 or sometimes 48 hours. Sometimes I make too much coffee during the school day, and the kids think I'm having a heart attack.
Yeah, I love that, especially like making the most out of long drives, like how you were talking about practicing almost like a script, but it's not a script. It's also kind of like improv. Like you have questions like in your head and being able to practice those. My next placement for student teaching is going to be like an hour from me. And I'm already thinking about that long drive because right now my placement's like 10 minutes from me, which is so convenient. I'm like, what am I going to do in the car? Well, that's what I'm going to be doing in the car now is like practicing because literally like interviewing it's like a full-time job when you're going through that process. Like you do have to prepare. You don't just like walk in an interview. You do have to do the research for those questions, and I like how you write down your answers and like, practice speaking them too. Even like mock interviews, I already know it's so generous and nice. Some of my student teaching placements, like different people there, they want to do mock interviews with me. Like the principal of the school is like, oh yeah, I want to meet with Emily before she goes and do a mock interview with her. And I was like, wow, okay, like awesome.
Before we get off the topic of interviews, because I am not an educator. I'm not sure, since you reached out to Emily, I'm a mezzo vocalist. So that's my background, and I was a performance major who graduated the year that Emily started, 2020. Great time to graduate. I've learned a lot from Emily in learning about what the education world is like. And a lot of the times our conversations do center around the deficiencies in our educational system. And one of the things that we've been talking about lately is how out of date some of the advice that we get from our professors is, regardless of what facet of music you're going into. Would you say that you've seen any patterns that candidates are showing that you think maybe point to some trends where our educational system is deficient in preparing future music educators for interviews and for careers?
Wow, that's a great question. Probably the only pattern I've really noticed with interviewing people is just a lack of the interpersonal skills of making eye contact and speaking clearly and not second guessing yourself out loud. So I think it's just probably interview skills. But I'm sure there is something as far as how people are prepared that would show up. So maybe my answer is just that the trend is they're not prepared for interviews.
Yeah.
And some people, it's obvious they've never had someone give them hands-on advice for how to interview.
Yes, I think we've both seen, me graduating at the beginning of the pandemic and Emily's entire educational career being shaped by it. Obviously, interpersonal relationships have suffered for everyone. Everyone has gotten a little bit rusty at those skills. And the adjustments that a lot of educational spaces had to make on the fly, I think, have left a lot of professors and programs burnt out. And there has been, not to disparage all of these educational facilities, but to call people out a little bit. I think Emily and I have both noticed a lack of enthusiasm and a lack of personal attention when it comes to students. And it's very natural that you're going to be not the most confident version of yourself fresh out of college, applying for your first jobs. And I think it is so important that you have those professors and those educators who really invest in taking that time while it is their job, because over the last several years, I think there's just a lot of people are out of practice. A lot of people's, whether it's their high school or their college or the beginning of their adult life, has been shaped by more isolation than we've historically had. There's no substitute for human interaction. I wish professors had the resources to not burn out, but I wish I would see more proactiveness in that regard.
That is so funny. We were literally like just talking about this a few hours ago, Claire.
That's why I brought it up. Thinking about 27-year-old PowerPoint slides in the classroom.
That one, but also the one professor we were talking about how my experience in music school was shaped by the pandemic. There was a professor who, as far as I had heard, leading up to COVID, was very like proactive, like genuinely cared about his students all the time, was always there. As soon as the pandemic year had happened, he recorded all the classes that he did. And so he had all those videos of him lecturing for each of his like planned lectures, and he saved all of them. So when it came time for the following year, when we were back to in-person school and I actually had him as a professor, he was trying to get the university to make it basically like asynchronous. He's like, well, I have all these videos of me lecturing, just send them out to the students, let them do it, and if they have questions they can email me. And he was really, really fighting for it. And the university, like, they kind of did something where they're like, okay, fine, like, but you have to meet with them once a week at least for an hour. And so he was like forced to do that. But I will admit, it was kind of painful because I was kind of a part of that conversation. He was also kind of asking me for my opinion and asking other professors like to advocate for him. And I'm like, well, it just seems like you really don't want to be here. This is like all I was getting. Like you really like, and it was like a music history course. And there's a lot of information in like music history courses. It's like, I'm not going to do well without having our regular 3 classes a week and like being lectured like in the moment. Like I can't just watch your video. And we tried that, and I think everybody's grades were like really awful and everyone was struggling. That then they put it back to the way it was before. But yeah, that's definitely a huge difference that I see. And going back to the part about interviewing, the confidence lacking, I feel like that is an effect of music school trauma that we all face in our own way. Because I see it in myself, but I see it in like my colleagues too. It's like when you leave music school and you've been told 1,000 times to quit, that you're never good enough and just to give up, which is a theme. It's not just our university, as far as I know, like it's many schools. Eventually it gets to you. You can tell yourself that it doesn't, but it's somewhere deeply rooted inside of you. And so when you go to interview and the pressure's on you in that moment and you have to pretend that you're all confident because you don't have it, it's really difficult. I wish that professors built us up with a little more confidence. I guess I don't really see people with a lot of big egos as often anymore. I don't know if that's a result of the pandemic or something.
There's a mentality of we have to break them down to build them up, but I don't think as many of us need to be broken down. And then also they never build us back up. So, and I'm sure that does lead to some of the like boosted egos that you do see in interviews, because I'm sure that's a lot of people's best technique to fake it, is to just, overstate and oversell themselves. And I'm sure that's a hard balance to find. And there's a lot of other factors demographically and across gender and across, backgrounds that I'm sure affect how that gets translated. But I think it's probably 2 sides of the same coin.
Yes, no, for sure.
Yeah, but I just feel lucky to have. I graduated college in 2013, and so I was on the other side of the Zoom for the pandemic.
This next question is like my favorite question. I can't wait to talk about this. How to separate hobbies from your career, and how to still enjoy hobbies that do intertwine with your career, aka like this podcast, right? Because it's a music related podcast, but it's also, I think of it separate from my career. I'm curious what advice you have on that.
This is a advice that I would always give my 8th graders as they were coming to the end of the year, and we've got our nice little thing going in orchestra class. And I would just try to instill in them that they have so much changing left to do. And if they've already defined themselves as certain nouns, at this point, they're going to miss out on a lot of life, and they're going to miss out on exploring the world through themselves. And what I mean by that is when I was that age, when I was in high school, like my number one identity was that I was a runner, because I was in cross country and track, and that was the first kind of group that I really bonded with. And since then I haven't run in probably 8 years, but it took me a long time to stop thinking of myself as a runner. And I think that I put pressure on myself by trying to call myself a runner or a professional musician or a writer or a woodworker or whatever you pursue, surfer or ice skater or violinist. There's all these labels that we try to put on ourselves, which then adds the pressure of trying to always do our best. And you tend to lose sight of just doing it because you enjoy it or because you need it in that moment. I think that mindset shift was subtle for me, but once I realized, like, oh, I don't have to call myself literally anything. The only true label I have is husband and dad, and beyond that, I can be and do anything that I want. And that, I felt like, really opened me up to just trying a lot of different activities, trying to really learn some new things, trying to explore other facets of music that I thought were not the track I wanted to pursue. Like, I guess a little tangent on that. I was always really classically focused on trumpet and with cello. And it's really only in the last 10 years that I've allowed myself to just explore other genres in a way that has no connotation of me being a professional in those genres. And now at this point, that's like all I do. I play trumpet in a 40s era Count Basie big band.
Oh, that's so fun.
Historical era music. I'm playing bass in a bluegrass band. I'm playing accordion in a polka band.
Wow.
And I've subbed with orchestras on cello and bass. I subbed with bands on trumpet. I've played in a brass band for like 6 years on trumpet. It just was so freeing to start doing those things because I wasn't trying to call myself a professional trumpet player, regardless of if I got paid for those gigs or not. And so as a young musician starts to progress into the world, like if you've already defined yourself by the fact that, in high school, I played volleyball and cello, and in college, I kind of let volleyball go, but I want to get back into it because that's what I'm good at. Like if those are the two things you're holding on to as a 24, 25, 26-year-old, like I'll tell you what will fill the void: a screen. Our phones and social media and the screens in our lives, they're just waiting for that chance to let your hobbies die and become your new hobby. And so I think it's really sad to see people who are just vibrantly enjoying things get to the point where their main hobby is now Instagram. That's not saying it's bad, to enjoy social media, to enjoy the things that the internet has to offer and the way that you connect with people, because that is the new way of connecting with people. But if you're not creating anything anymore, the only act of creation that you're engaging in is your thumb refreshing a page, I think it's time to reevaluate the labels you put on yourself.
Dang, yeah, that's powerful. Oof.
I was wondering how you felt about that, Emily, as someone who Instagram is one of your big hobbies, but you are creating for it. You're not just sitting.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, like social media, it's like I'm huge to talk about that stuff because there are pros and cons. Honestly, I don't spend a lot of time like scrolling or even looking at what other people post. I kind of have like a select few like close friends that I try to keep up with like through Instagram. So if they're posting about their lives, but I don't get to see them as often anymore. Yeah, I check in and see how they're doing. And then there's like specific like business pages or music related pages and stuff that I follow. That's again all tied back to what I'm really on there for, which is content creation and building my own page. So I spend a lot of time on there solely for that. It's like solely for myself, like not for myself because it's for other people when I'm putting out there, but solely for that page. So no, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, with everything that you're saying. It's the part where you're in that like doom scroll sort of effect, or if you're just like, you can almost like convince yourself that you're so tired that you just sit there on your phone for hours and hours, and realistically you do have the energy. It's just easy to get sucked into that addictive process. And I've been there. I think we've all been there before.
I think it's harder now than it used to be because, again, this is something we talk about all the time, is that it's become a mandatory part of marketing yourself these days. I'm somebody who very different from Emily. I don't like social media. I don't like interacting with it. I want to keep up. I have a lot of long distance friends. So that's what it's good for. But in terms of like, I don't want to be a brand. But this day and age, in the gig economy, particularly as musicians, where it's very, very hard not to have a patchwork income, all of us sort of do. It's hard to not be pigeonholed because you are looking to brand yourself, and that can be so soul sucking. To at least for me, like the prospect of turning myself into something marketable feels extremely daunting and exhausting and limiting. But I think what you're saying is ringing really personal, like not pigeonholing yourself so much. Even in terms of something Emily and I talk about all the time, in terms of abilities changing. I'm disabled now. I was not when I started my college career. And over the course of my college career, I had to accept that I'm not going to be the person with perfect attendance anymore. And I'm not going to be the straight A student anymore, which doesn't mean that I'm not doing the work or showing up or impressing people. It just means that I can't, even though those things are great things, if you're able to do them, they can't be my identity markers, because once those things start to become unattainable, then the ego becomes fractured, and then your self-image becomes fractured. And then how are you supposed to convince anyone else to hire you if you wouldn't want to hire yourself? Nobody can do it all. The only times that I've learned that lesson have been when life has fed it to me through a bunch of hard knocks. I think probably you can relate to that.
What that makes me think of too, and you brought up the ice skating part, Nathan. I really didn't think about like labels I had for myself. I skated for like, what was it, like 7 years? I'd have to go back and check, but like I was a full-on figure skater when I was younger. And I had a bit of a tragic like ending, not super tragic, but a little bit of a tragic like sudden ending where I just had to pick skating or music, and music was my career. So to come back to it as a skater, but even as a coach, like that was a big step. I don't think I realized how big that was. And the labeling part, I think that's where people get more anxious about trying something new or going back to something old, is like, well, what am I? Like, what can I call myself if I do this? Who am I? And then people are afraid to be beginners or to go back to something that they stopped doing. But for me specifically, in this hobby of being a coach, right, 'cause it's not my career, but can help my career. Parts of it are similar to my career, but it's separate from my career. And I think that's where I find some peace in it, is like coaching is very similar to teaching, but skating is separate from the music world. They're both very different. Even this podcast, I think this is a really great example. Like it's related to music, but on here we get a little more like choice and leeway. We don't have to interact with some of the really highly competitive and toxic people and environments of the music world. This is more of almost like advocacy work and like helping other people, meeting other people, having conversations like this, which is totally different from performing and teaching. I'm curious more about that experience where you had like 75 fourth graders, and like where exactly this idea though for the Tadpoles like came from, and some experiences you've had using them.
Yeah, give us the Shark Tank pitch.
Yes.
How this goes.
Yeah. Okay, so when I first started teaching, I had taken methods class in college, and I thought, well, I took the methods class, so I'm prepared to teach anything. You know, I can teach all the string instruments, and I can teach all the wind instruments because I was able to play a scale on bassoon and violin and bass and everything. And I really believed that. And so then I got out into the real world, and I still considered myself as trumpet being my primary instrument and cello being my secondary kind of dual instrument. I took lessons on both through college. I never wanted to teach bands. I knew I always wanted to teach orchestra. And something that always stuck with me, there's a piece of advice that goes something like, as long as you're a good enough musician, on just a raw, pure musician, you can teach any instrument or any level. And so they would tell us that, to say like, well, if voice is really your primary instrument, if you just become the best musician and singer you can, that will translate to being able to teach fourth graders string instruments, or to teach general music, or to teach whatever. And I really believed that too. I just thought, okay, I'm really going to focus on trumpet, and my pure musicianship will guide me through starting kids on string instruments. Found out very quickly that's not the case. And so, my background was in cello, so I knew my cello bow really well. And the way that I had planned to teach violin was just, I'm going to teach them the cello bow hold, and then we'll just have them put their pinky up, bam, we're good to go. And it just wasn't working, right? It's the cello, that cello bow hold for those cellists, like if I'm teaching it fast to everybody, it always turns into this thing where they're going across this way. And the violin players turn into like this kind of a bow hold, or this.
And I feel like we know them all too. Like you could probably name every single weird way that they've held them before.
I didn't even know there were different ways. I guess it makes sense. The bows are different sizes. I didn't know there were different ways that you hold different bows for other instruments. So,
well, there are some people teaching orchestra out there who don't know that either. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So then the next thing that I was told was start all the kids with a pencil, and that will help them be able to take the weight off the bow, of having the actual bow that's dragging them down. And that, I felt like my results were even worse with the pencil because I didn't have the foundational understanding of where they were trying to get by using the pencil. You need to like really, really know what the end result is if you want to use something like a pencil to get there. And there are a lot of teachers who do a really great job doing that. I was not one of them. It was a few years of struggling through bow holds, and at that point I was teaching the summer camp. I was working with some of the beginners, but mostly I was teaching 7th and 8th grade. The kids would come to me with already, most of their skills set, and if they had a bad bow hold when they came to me, they had a bad bow hold when they left me because I couldn't fix it, and I just thought, okay, I just am not meant to do this. And then I just had this idea that was like, what if there was something that was meant for just that first week of instruction that showed the kids where their fingers go, but it didn't like force their hand into it. Because I tried that a little bit. I built these like pinky houses that were really tall and just like held the pinky in there. And some people will put a rubber band around the frog that just holds these two fingers on, and then they'll have like a horn pad or something for the thumb that it's like everything is really set in there. But I think what that does is it forces their fingers into those spots, and they can become a crutch so that when you take them off, their hand can kind of collapse. I'll spare you the arduous process of getting this to become a real product, but what we ended up with was Tadpoles. And it was for violin and viola, cello, and French bass. And they're called Tadpoles because you can't have a frog until you have a tadpole first.
That's what I thought.
For those of you listening, if you didn't get that joke, yeah. So on the violin, what I did is I modeled the bow itself. And then I added this really shallow little dish right here for your thumb, so you can feel right where your thumb goes on that facet. And then on top, I call this the washboard. And it's just ridges. I didn't put it all the way around because the washboard represents like the leather on the violin, but I didn't put it all the way around like the leather is because you only contact on the top. And some kids, their bow hold is where they wrap that first finger around, right? So if there's no feature that they're trying to feel for, then that can really get them to leave it on top and then leave that relaxed first finger. This feature here, it's like an oval. It's really, really slight. I guess you could call it a variation of like a little nest. But it's so slight, you can see in relation to my pinky, like I can feel the boundary, but it's not forcing my pinky to do anything. I tend to call that the swimming pool when I'm working with kids, and I'll just say one person in the pool at a time. They put their pinky in there. And then the last feature is these little bumps right on the frog. And that's for your first two fingers. So the way I'll walk them through is with their thumb set. I'll have them hold it with their left hand. So their thumb is in the divot. And the first finger falls down on the washboard in the swimming pool. And then these two fingers should feel the bumps. And that keeps the kids who have it right up on top. They can just rest that over right into the bumps. And then right away, they've got the shape. First, I'll have them relax their hand because some of them are trying to death grip it, or they're doing this kind of a thing. So I'll have them all relax so everything curves. And I'll have them just like drop it, keep the hand shape, but drop it into their hands and then put it back. And that's your bow hold right there. And then the first thing we do is we go back to our real bow, and we just go back and forth. And so that they can really kind of, it's like I'm trying to get them to map these features onto their bow with their mind so that they don't need any of those crutches, but that they know where those features are. Because what these do is they've left all of the contact points open so that you can just transfer it right to your bow. So that's the kind of philosophy behind it. None of the features on here are my opinions about bow holds. This is all done through, I did like a year of research first on all 4 of the bow holds. Well, really, there's dozens of bow holds, but the 4 instrument bow holds. And I was just watching as many videos of close-ups as I could. I was trying to take like screenshots of Hillary Hahn and Itzhak Perlman in performance and try to catch what their bow hold looks like up at the frog and way down at the tip of the bow, and what it looks like when they're doing flying spiccato, and what it looks like when they're playing legato, what it looks like when they're playing piano or fortissimo. And it's all slightly different. And then you can add into different players' bow holds, which are they either sit farther back, or they sit deeper, or they sit shallow, or they sit first fingers past the knuckle, or between the knuckles. I took all of that information and incorporated it into these features so that any of those ways you can teach and it will work on here. But they all have boundaries so that if a student finds the extreme boundaries on all the features, they're still going to have a good starting place. Like they can't not have a good starting place with this. It might not be your teacher's preferred bow hold, but it's way better of a place to start that then when the teacher makes adjustments, it's micro adjustments.
Right.
They're all different, obviously. I guess real quickly, just to mention with cello, the main difference with cello, that washboard, instead of being on the top, like the violin, now it's on the side. And then that thumb divot is about the same. It's a little more rotated up on the stick. And then where the ferrule would be, I took a little chunk, a little bite out of it. So there's a cutout right there for your middle finger to feel. So you've got thumb, first finger, the middle finger right on that little cutout. And then the bumps on the cello tadpole are kind of opposite of where the bumps on the violin are, because it's for different fingers. On the violin, it's for your middle 2. On cello, it's for your last 2.
These are so much more complex than I realized. I just saw the photos. Emily, you've gotten a chance to see these and get your hands on them. Have you gotten to use them with students at all?
With my private students, yes.
Yeah.
Which I found very helpful, specifically with a 7-year-old. Because in some ways, like when they get a little bit older, for some, it can be easier to explain it to them and like verbally and use more like advanced language. But when it comes to like younger kids, like 11 and under, I would say, yeah, that's like vital to have something, especially like the little like sensory things where they can feel, oh, this is where this one goes, and then this, and like sitting in the pool, one only is in the pool at a time, like all that stuff. Yeah, I love it. It's so important.
My only regret is that I didn't have these ready during the pandemic.
That would have been helpful.
Yeah.
This would have been a game changer through the screen. So
yes.
My main vision with Tadpoles, it's been helping a lot of people teach their beginners. I've had a few high school programs buy them as like remedial instruction for kids who made it to high school with a messed up bow hold, and then they like just need that rehab, I guess, on their hands. But my true vision is actually to have Tadpoles used in colleges, train teachers, because that is the thing that I needed most as a trumpet player who wanted to teach orchestra, who I retained like nothing from my string tech class or the wrong things. But if I had had a set of these that like I owned and I brought with me, I could at least remind myself what the bow hold should look like before I'm like doing damage in a lesson group with kids. So there's a few programs, college programs, who are kind of piloting these right now. Sandra Dachau is using them. David Pope at Baldwin Wallace. The University of Minnesota has used them. Morehead State, I think, he's going to start using them because there's percussionists or flute players or bassoon players out there who are going to be licensed to teach orchestra, and whether they want to teach it or not, they might end up with an orchestra job. Mm-hmm. And you need them to be as factual as possible, right? Yes, we want them to be amazing musicians on their instrument. We also want them to have the skill of teaching kids how to play, how to hold the bow correctly, which is something that took me too long to figure out. And this is my answer to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I honestly too, as a sport, like mainly string player who is also going to be expected to teach woodwinds and brass, I wish too like that there were specific things like more technically that we were told, like not only learning how to play the instruments but learning how to teach them. And some of my techniques teachers did do that, but some of them also did not. And I guess I can't really speak on how string techniques was at my school because I actually didn't take it there. I was able to just like pass through it because I played all the instruments and stuff for them. But yeah, I think that's hugely important as we make sure we're not just learning in techniques classes how to play the instruments, but we have to have those like beginner like strategies, learning how to explain it to somebody else. So it's like you're learning how to do the thing that you're going to be teaching, which is crazy, but that's also kind of like what we're expected to do as music teachers. And currently right now, student teaching, I'm very lucky that my cooperating teacher is setting up days for me to have solely with the band director and with her kids. And when she told me that, she just set it up and I was like, uh-oh. And she's like, yeah, I know. You're going to spend days with the band and you're going to figure out how to teach all that. So you're ready. And I'm like, thank you. Because I do need it, although I'm afraid. So yeah, especially with the bow hand, just like I see Claire's reaction too. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was that complex. And it's like, no one really does. Yeah, it's like you have to, it's hard to teach. And you can't just, stick the bow, like, which is such a foreign object in a little kid's hand and expect them to get it right off the bat. As dark as it sounds, the way that I fixed my pinky and my bow hand was by cutting it with a bread knife. If you know that story, Nathan, Claire knows that story. Pumpkin carving injury. I always had that locked pinky finger and I was actively working on it. My teacher was on me and then I had that injury and now my pinky doesn't straighten all the way anymore. And it was like an automatic fix. So I'm like, okay, I got lucky. Now I have to be able to like explain how to fix this to kids. So sometimes when I'm like showing them what they're doing, I have to use my other hand because I can't actually like lock that pinky. And then, it's kind of like that thing too, when we're learning how to explain something to someone else that is new for them is like flip hands or like do reverse with the violin or viola, reverse bow hand. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is how it feels for them, which is an interesting thing to think about. I just wanted to throw out there.
Colleges, they're doing their best, but they need resources too, just like
that's true.
Teachers do. And they don't have the time to really fully make sure everyone who goes through is truly a double major and can like truly teach all of those instruments. Yeah. Even for people who are like, I know Emily, you play both clefs. Well, the low clef and the high clef. You probably play alto clef too. But for people who come through and they're music ed and they're just like a fantastic violinist and they don't play any other instruments, not even viola or piano, they just play violin. That doesn't transfer to teaching cello or teaching bass. Like, I would ask, how's your German bass bow hold and control as a professional violinist? And so it's making sure that like you understand the pedagogy. I guess one point back to when I said as a cellist, I thought all you have to do is teach the cello bow hold and pop that with you. And it would always turn into just these weird violin bow holds where the fingers become ducky and flat. And my cellists, if I wasn't on them, it would always turn into this. And it's because on the cello, the bow hold approaches from the top, right? Because you're trying to play on, this edge of the bow hair, right? So when you're playing, the fingers are really long, they're hanging over. You teach that to a violin player and then tell them to put their pinky up. What they're going to end up doing is like having way too much depth on their grip. Yeah, their pinky is going to be forced to be bent, but they're going to have this really long shape. They're not going to be able to control. They're not going to be able to have any bounce, like playing spiccato, because the violin approach has to come from the side. Like cello is from the top. Violin comes from the side. And all of the features on the tadpoles point in those directions to keep that hand shape. And that's the kind of nuance that you don't explain to the kids. Like, do not, your teacher, and you're going to use tadpoles, do not tell your fourth graders this. They will zone out immediately. Just tell them swimming pool, washboard, the little dish for your thumb. That's all you need to tell them. And kids zone out so fast when you start talking about anatomy, right? Oh, this is your scapula. And it comes around on this side, and you have to know what muscle this is and how this has to straighten when you get to this point, and that's your bicep is turned this way. You gotta, just use fewer words or no words if possible. It's the best way.
Okay, I think to wrap up, what is your advice to young aspiring music teachers in conservatory who are about to start student teaching or looking for jobs?
Looking for jobs part, I feel like we kind of covered that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's so random what jobs are open, so you just have to decide where your line is, what you're willing to take, and what you can always apply and say no. As for people who are starting their career teaching or student teaching, don't fall into the trap that almost every young first-year teacher makes by saying, you know what, I want to be like a nice teacher who's like just cool and really chill. I feel like it's a trap to do that because the kids will always take advantage of you 100% of the time. They'll take advantage of your like niceness and chillness, whatever that means, and your classroom will turn into a zoo. The advice that I give, which I started doing early and never failed me, was my first like month of teaching every year, I would show up wearing a suit and tie to school every day. I would make sure the kids knew all of the expectations and they knew that there was a timeline for the room. My rule was once the bell rang, you had 1 minute. You had to be in the room when the bell rang. You had 1 minute to be in your seat with your music out and your instrument out ready to sing. And the first day, kids would come in, the bell would ring. I would just be looking at the clock and I would just be saying, 50 seconds, 45 seconds. And I would just be counting it down and they would start rushing once they realized what was happening. And then eventually it would take 3 minutes for everyone to be settled. And I would just say, okay, you, and you, we're not here on time. It's the first day of class with instruments. So this is the only time I'm going to let it slide this entire year. Don't let it happen again tomorrow. And they wouldn't know if I was joking or if I was serious, but I was wearing a suit, so they didn't want to find out. And then that's how I would run my classroom. I would be really strict. If the next day someone was actually late, I would enforce that. I would say, I'd like you to talk to me in class. The behavior issues would clear up really fast. The time wasting would clear up really fast. Because I've been in scenarios with teachers where it's January and their kids literally take 9 minutes to get ready to tune. They don't play anything as a group for about 9 minutes. And that is such a waste of time. So I start the year really strict and like they think I might be kind of mean. And then I start introducing a little bit of my drier humor and I start not wearing a tie some days because I don't want to wear a suit and tie every day to school. And then by the end of the year, like I'm dressed casually. Kids have a lot more leeway because I trust them and they trust me, but they're following the rules. They're doing a lot of spontaneous activities in class and they're laughing and it's about building culture. All that is building a culture. And if you think as a first year teacher that you're going to build culture from day one, that is you know what? I'm the teacher who's going to give everyone a second, third chance on everything. And as long as you guys mean well, I'm not going to like come down too hard on you. We will always take advantage of that, and it just turns into a zoo. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It probably comes off a little old school, but start old school and then morph into who you are once they're like regimented. You can't start by being Mr. Schneebly and then try to turn into a drill sergeant. School of Rock
Yeah.
reference.
Emily, have you seen School of Rock?
No, that's why I didn't laugh, because I didn't get the joke.
Okay, I was thinking about that. I was like, if you haven't seen that, you need to. I honestly, again, not a teacher, not something I want to do. So much respect for the people who do. I will say that, I grew up singing in a very, very prestigious children's choir, which is the foundation for everything that I ever did. And they were extremely strict, fair, kind, but extremely strict. Once they got to know you, you might get a little bit more leeway if they knew your personal situations, but consistent. And I was so grateful for that discipline once I got to conservatory, because the lessons that I was learning from my music teachers as a child, with these teachers who were stricter, who were militant about our cue was she would just sing a note and everybody had to match that note. Once you got into high school, it was a 4-part harmony, but that would be the cue, is everyone would just start singing on ooh, and then you had to quiet down. But learning how to walk on stage without like slumping across the stage, learning how to open your folders on cue, and how to take pride in your work. I think a lot of people are afraid to be harsh, but honestly, in my experience, children want to be taken seriously. And when they know that their teacher takes them seriously enough to want their time to be respected, they realize that it works both ways. You're always going to get the kids who are a little bit more wild, but I know for me as a child, it was very satisfying because I felt like, okay, we're all here to do something. And it feels very powerful and very rewarding. And it wasn't particularly scary because I knew that they knew that I wanted to respect them. And I will tell you, those things that I was learning as a 10-year-old that got so drilled into me as an eager young musician were things that we were still having to drill people on in college who had not had that same background, about posture when you go on stage and spacing when you're in your lines, and just very basic things. But it's surprising how much you realize, oh, those lessons don't go away. And if you learn them early, it will save you a world of hurt later.
That's the thing, is like the kids, they love the wall, but they also hate the wall. But like you have to be the wall because I mean, without it, it gets to a point where it's like they feel like nobody really cares about them. And having those set rules is what kind of gives us a place and a purpose. So yeah, no, I don't think anything you were saying like seemed too harsh at all. I think it's like obligated that we have that in place, and that's something that we forget, is we want to be the teacher that everybody loves, so we think we have to be this particular way where we're not super firm, and that's the foundation of showing that we love the kids. So yeah, I'm keeping that in my mind as I'm currently working on my student teacher beginning orchestra class of junior high kids, which, as you can imagine, is interesting. So that will definitely help me.
I think it also extends to make sure you're not saying good after every time they play. Don't get in the habit of being like, good job. It's okay to tell the kids, here's a hot take, it's okay to tell the kids they sounded bad. And it doesn't have to be like you did bad, but you can say that didn't come out quite right, and here's why. Because if they know that you will tell them the truth when it's bad, they will really respect and feel accomplishment for when you tell them it was good. And so you don't have to, if you always just say, that was so good, and you're just trying to like move on to the next thing. But you go, that was so good. Can we pretty please just double check that our fourth finger was high enough on those G sharps, or our third finger was high enough on those G sharps? You can smile and say, good work. And then they feel like, okay, we just made progress. Instead of everything they do is good or good try or that was great. Like,
sometimes that breaks the tension better when you have, I'll never forget, obviously don't say this to children, but I will never forget when our choir director, who used to be Emily knew as the music education department head, was really frustrated with us one day, and she cuts us off in the middle of a phrase and goes, "Stop pussyfooting around." Honestly, it didn't offend any of us. It was like, okay, it's time we can all laugh for a second, relieve the tension, and then get to work.
Yeah, it's so funny you just brought that up because it was literally just today where my 8th grade violins weren't doing low twos, and I told them that note was haunting me in my nightmares. And they it grabbed their attention. They weren't like hurt by it. They thought it was funny, and they laughed, and they immediately had their attention focused on those low twos. So yeah, 100%. That is very important. Yeah, no, lots of really great things. All right, thank you everyone for listening. If you have any feedback, you can reach us at dissonantdialogues@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 872-216-9032 with feedback. Also, if you'd like to be a guest or if you have topic ideas or questions. Give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. We're Dissonant Dialogues on both of those platforms. And Nathan, would you like to plug your socials?
Sure. We're on Instagram, and it's arcofrog_com. ARCOFROG. Or you can go to our website, www.arcofrog.com, to find the products and a little bit about our story.
All right, sounds good. All right, thank you, Nathan, for joining us, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You're a joke. You're the worst teacher I've ever had.
Summer, that is great. I like the delivery because I felt your anger.
Thank you.
All right, well.
I did not have a massage today.
I'm stubborn. Emily is stubborn. I think I can say that.
Oh yeah, you can.
Those are so corny, Shark Tank. You actually have to have skills to teach.
I know nothing.
There's so many wrong ways to do it. If you're listening to this, use your imagination, I guess. I don't know if you've done this video, but maybe you could have like a different bow hold and then a name for them.
That.
You know what? Honestly, Nathan, we should collaborate on something like that on Instagram. That'd be a really good idea.
What bone is connected to what?
What is your advice to young let me try that again. 9 p.m., like my bedtime is 2 hours ago.
Instead, it's fine to just be direct and say, "Hey, violins, I heard some really swampy G sharps.
Stop pussyfooting around."